Hey guys, welcome back for part 2 of the Toys4Life C5 complete C5 mod list, where the purpose of the video is to walk through all of the mods I've done to the C5 over the past 10 years, do a very brief review of the mod, and then ask one very important question. If I could go back in time and perform the mod all over again, would I do that, or instead, would I opt to keep the cash? Toys4Life. In part 1, we covered a lot of ground, including all of the mods that you see here on your screen. So if you missed that video or you just want to check it out again, it's up in your upper right-hand corner. Now let's jump right into part 2 with a very important chassis modification. It is the HPI Transaxle mount. As you may know, the transmission and the differential on the C5s are bolted together, and it's located right here in the rear of the car. The transaxle is supported by the cradle, and it's bolted together with a giant rubber mount from the factory. That factory mount is rather large, and it's made of rubber, which is very soft and squishy, and it's definitely a compromise because it does a great job of isolating noise and vibration from the rear differential and drivetrain from the chassis so that the occupants don't feel anything. The problem is, even under very light acceleration, it deflects a lot. So exactly how much does it deflect? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here's a little video of just a very soft launch of the C5 in my driveway, and take a look at how much that rubber deflects downward as the C5 accelerates. Now for just a moment, imagine how much deflection there would be under a serious launch effort, and throw in a little wheel spin and that mount's gonna be sloppy and all over the place. I think you can see that the stock transaxle mount is just not up to the task. The HPI transaxle mount is a substantial piece. It uses little bump stops on the ends, it's got a polyurethane main bushing, and it greatly reduces any sort of twisting of the drivetrain or up and down deflection under hard acceleration. Now, of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch, so in exchange for that much more firmly planted C5 rear end, you're gonna pick up a little bit of gear noise and drivetrain vibration from the transaxle through the mount into the chassis, but in my humble opinion, it's pretty mild. So if you want to improve how your C5 handles those hard launches, then something like the HPI diff mount is absolutely a must. If you're somebody who rarely hits wide open throttle and you don't launch your C5 all that hard, then this is a mod that you probably can skip. But for me, I'd absolutely perform this mod again. Now the next mod is the Kenny Bell Boost-A-Pump, which for me was an option when I bought the supercharger kit for the C5 Corvette. The Kenny Bell Boost-A-Pump does exactly what it sounds like when the supercharger is providing boost to the LS1 engine, which is typically about 1/4 to 1/3 throttle or higher. The Kenny Bell Boost-A-Pump has a vacuum signal to it, so it knows that it's under boost. And in turn, the Boost-A-Pump increases the voltage to the stock fuel pumps, which increases their volume capacity while maintaining fuel pressure. The really cool thing about the Kenny Bell Boost-A-Pump is that it only has to kick in that 2 or 3% of the time where the LS1 is under boost. The other 97 to 98% of the time, the stock fuel pumps are running just as they would normally, which means they're going to be quite reliable. So if I could go back in time, would I use the Kenny Bell Boost-A-Pump again? I absolutely would. I've had it on the C5 for many years now. I'm always scanning and monitoring when I'm doing quarter-mile passes or I'm at the dyno, and I have never once seen the engine go lean, which is exactly the way it's supposed to be. The next item up is an appearance mod, and it's a fairly popular rear spoiler from Spoiler King. It's their model 284P, and it's more of a mid to low rise duckbill spoiler. Before I made the purchase, I searched high and low for pretty much every spoiler I could find, and at the end of the day, this one ended up on my car because I felt that it made a subtle but noticeable difference, with my favorite view being the one from directly behind. I also like the fact and appreciate that the Spoiler King attaches to the C5 with automotive grade double-side adhesive. This makes it easy if for any reason down the road I want to remove it, install a different one, or whatever. Oh, and the best part is it's very inexpensive, coming in at somewhere around $100. So if I could do it over, would I install the Spoiler King again? Heck yeah, I think I would. The next mod up is for manual transmission C5s only. It doesn't cost much money at all, but it absolutely makes a difference in the way the car shifts. The stock shifter in the C5 Corvette was designed way back in the mid-1990s when pretty much all shifters were at least a foot long. Thankfully, times have changed and now there's several great options for aftermarket shifters for the C5 Corvette, but if you want to maintain kind of that stock OEM look, while at the same time shortening your shifter quite a bit to reduce those throws, this is a viable option as long as you've got a few hand tools and an hour or two of time to spare. All that's really involved is step one, you remove the shifter from the car, you remove the shift knob, you shorten the shifter, and then you have to extend the channel in the shifter a little bit so that the wedge can continue to secure the knob to the shifter. After that, you just simply reinstall your shifter and enjoy the fruits of your labor. And so for almost no money and perhaps an hour or two of your time and the satisfaction of knowing you did the job yourself, of course I would absolutely do this mod again. Next up, we have one more appearance upgrade, and it was long overdue on my C5, and chances are it's overdue on yours as well. This is because the front turn signal lenses take an exterior beating from all the road debris that's kicked up from other vehicles, and they take an internal beating from all the heat cycling over the past 20 years from the stock incandescent bulbs. And yes, those incandescent bulbs do get extremely hot. But the good news is these brand new, modern looking turn signal assemblies from Apparel look absolutely fantastic, and they're extremely affordable as well, so I'll be sure to leave a link in the description below. Now they're not LED assemblies, nor do they cost anywhere near the same as new LED assemblies, but instead they reuse the C5 stock incandescent bulbs, so no matter where you are, a replacement bulb will always be as close as your nearest AutoZone. So if your C5 Corvette has 50,000 miles or more on it, chances are your lenses are looking shabby as well. Even if you have just a modest amount of mechanical ability, as long as you have the ability to get the C5's front end up on a set of ramps or jack stands, this is a project that I think you can do yourself. So are these new turn signal assemblies worth the small amount of time, money, and effort you'll have to spend to get them installed? I don't know. Take a look. Here's a good look at the old lights from 2003, and they've clearly seen better days. Wow, what a stunning difference for just $55 and an hour or two of work. This is a no-brainer. Well, that pretty much seals the deal for me. They look great, and I think they're worth the money and the time to install them. So if I could go back and do it over again, would I buy them again? That's going to depend on what I have for exterior lighting on the rest of the car, and my C5 still has incandescent bulbs all the way around, and I think they look fine. So if my turn signals broke today, I'd absolutely do it again. But you do have to consider your long-term plans. If you're going to use LEDs in the back and the side marker lights, then maybe a set of LEDs are in your future. So that's going to depend on what you want to do with your C5. The next item is a set of brand new LS6 valve springs that I installed on the LS1 shortly after I added the supercharger. As you probably know, supercharging the LS1 engine really wakes it up, and that effect is even more pronounced in the upper RPM areas. With that in mind, after careful consideration and research, I've chosen to raise my RPM shift points from 5,900 all the way up to about 6,400 RPMs. I did that to take advantage of that higher RPM horsepower that centrifugal superchargers are so good at making without getting greedy and shifting all the way up at close to 7,000 RPMs. Being as how my stock LS1 springs were getting a little bit tired because the car had about 70,000 miles at the time, and being as how I was moving my shift RPMs up by about 500 over where the stock LS1 redline is, and being as how the LS6 engine has a factory redline of 6,500 RPMs, I thought the LS6 springs would be a good fit. Now it is true that back in the day, 20 years ago, GM did have a failure issue with the LS6 valve springs that came on the Z06s, but that was 20 years ago. The problem's been addressed, and based on my research, that issue has long since been resolved. Now the LS6 valve springs have been on my C5 for a little over 4 years now, and I have been through the RPM range from 0 to 6,500 too many times to count. I've done a ton of scanning with HP Tuner Scanner at the drag strip and on the dyno, and I have not seen any evidence of valve float or any other issues whatsoever. So here's the question. Would I select LS6 valve springs for my C5 if I had to make the decision again today? Yes, I would. What about you? Should you use LS6 valve springs on your C5 project? Well, due to how catastrophic the damage can be if you have a valve spring break at high RPMs, I'm going to kind of wuss out on this answer and just simply suggest that you talk to various parts suppliers, professionals, do your own research based on your intended RPMs, your parts combination of your camshaft, your lifters, your push rods, your intended use. Are you doing endurance racing or just short-term drag racing or just driving on the street? With all of those factors in mind, when you've concluded your research, then you can make an informed decision for yourself. Last but not least on the mod list is swapping in a set of C6 Z06 Shocks onto your C5. You heard that correctly. I'm talking about adding shocks designed for the C6 Z06 and putting them on your C5 Corvette. Now, as much as I'd like to, I cannot take credit for this modification. I stumbled on it several years back and it seemed quite interesting, so I started to research it. And based on all the research I did, it's actually a pretty common modification, and the vast majority of people that have tried it seem to like it a lot. So I decided to go for it, and I ordered up a set of 4 C6 Z06 shocks for the C5 and installed them. And I can say that it definitely firms up the ride nicely, just like a sports car should be, but not so much so that it might make your daily driven C5 unpleasant to drive. The best part is these factory GM parts for the C6 are not all that expensive, which is quite unusual, and they install just like the stock C5 shocks would. So if I had it to do over again today, would I install the C6 Z06 shocks on the C5 all over again? The answer is yes, and in fact, I like the C6 Z06 shocks so well, I might just install a set on the non-Z06 C6. That's going to do it for this one, guys. If this video benefited you in any way, please hit that thumbs up, consider subscribing or leaving a comment, but most of all, thanks for watching.